if you don't really know what's happening in your business, you can't change it. And most organizations don't really know what goes on.
Do we know our business? Do we really know what happens? We sell lovely stuff, but do we really know what happens on the inside to get that lovely stuff out the door? Understand your business, understand your people, and then think about how we're going to change and find your champions.
It all boils down to 4 elements. It's inputs, processes, outputs, and outcomes. If you can change those things, the inputs, the process, and the outputs, you'll get a different outcome. You'll get the change you want.
Hello, I'm John Ingram Marriott, and this is Field Service Stories, brought to you by Big Change. This afternoon, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Lee Williams, who has spent his whole life in changing organizations' mindset. Lee, you've had a long career doing this. We'd love to know what makes you have become the change meister.
Thank you very much for having me here in your lovely new offices. I think we spoke earlier when I said that, generally people think there are 2 constants, tax and death, but I think there are 3. There's 3 constants that are always going to happen: tax, death, and change. So nothing lasts forever. To stay competitive, be it in a sporting environment or in a professional environment, organizations have to change. So those that accept change as organizations and individuals that accept change, the sooner the better, then the more of an advantage they have against their competitors who perhaps don't accept it as willingly.
So sorry to interrupt you there. So what made you decide to major in this space of change? Because most people hate change, to your point. So what was it about this world that you thought, I'm going to make a career in here?
Well, my early career was in sales.
Right.
So I spent 6 or 7 years in a field sales role within the life science sector. I trained as a research scientist. I did pharmacology and physiology at university. And so I have a scientific approach to things, a sort of scientific approach to the sales process in a way. But ultimately, it's about convincing people to change. And I wanted to understand from a scientific perspective how businesses worked. I worked at the coalface, things happened that let my customers down, that let me down. And as an individual, I always got frustrated with not really understanding, or perhaps not believing sometimes, the reasons that were given to me. And so in 1999, I decided that enough was enough, and I needed to understand how businesses worked. So I went off and did an MBA full-time, spent 2 years studying all aspects of how businesses operate to be able to join the dots up and understand how that sort of system, a bit like going to university and understanding how the human body works, understanding how businesses are put together, how the dots join up, or sometimes they don't join up, and then optimizing it. So, as a sports person, you're always looking to improve performance. I'm competitive. I like to, see if there's different ways to get from A to B and experiment. I've got a curious mind. So I think all of the things that you need for accepting change, I don't like to do the same things over and over again. I don't really want to work in the same office every day. And so, I like to think I'm accepting of change, but I think in terms of delivering change, there's an enormous sales process in there. In a sense, you've got to convince people that the new is better than the old.
Yeah. Well, today's subject is technology and change, and we, as you know, Big Change is a field management organization, and you worked with us in the past. And it's interesting to look at the drivers in our market at present. And we're up on the screen, and we're discussing it earlier. In the last 10 years, there's been an enormous push to get productivity out of our field forces because of the sheer diverse number of different utility organizations doing stuff in our streets and our roads. We've got the water people having to put in their water meters. You've got the electric folk now having to accept the fact we're pumping back into the grid. You've got the telcos ripping up the pavements left, right, and center. And you've got the gas having to replace Victorian gas lines. This change is right across the whole field management space. And given those kind of drivers in the market, where are you at in terms of what kind of organizations have you worked with where the use of technology has made a big difference to these kind of activities?
I think the key to having technology support a change process is having the right information with the right people at the right time. Generally, business processes fail because either the wrong people are in the wrong place with the wrong information at the wrong time. And early on in my career, what my years in sales taught me was how to understand what customers' outcomes are. Because not everybody wants what you think they want. I've sold products in the past because people like the packaging, not the product. I've had to convince people to change because they used to sell our packaging on for their Christmas parties. And we used to sell product in lead because it was radioactive, and we could ship in plastic. And it took me a long time to convince them. But they didn't buy it because it was unsafe. They bought it because they sold the lead. And so I paid for their Christmas party, and we started to ship in plastic. And when you're flying product in from America and you're encasing it in lead, it's expensive. So what that taught me really, the early part of my career, is really understanding outcomes. And actually customers have different outcomes. And change is inevitable, as I described earlier. So we're going to change things for a reason. Some of the outcomes won't be positive for some of the customers either. Some of the changes might mean that they've got to do things they don't want to do. So it's having that map of understanding, and also then finding the doors that are easier to push open as opposed to the ones that might slam in your face. So in terms of early career, it was about customers. Then it was about joining the dots up. How do we make things happen as a business? We use the word culture quite a lot. But that's really, how we do things here. And when you say, well, this is how we do things here, well, when you do that, you describe the processes. But actually the wee bit's interesting in that I tend to talk about three things. I talk about processes, people, and profit. Because people process profit. So if you can get your people to all do the things you want them to do at the right time with efficiency and effectiveness, and they follow the right processes, then you've got a good opportunity to create profit. The problem is that they don't. And so technology allows us to completely remove the human from processes because they're the biggest liability. People talk about people being their biggest asset. And they are, in terms of that's what makes organizations different. But they're also their biggest liability because we just don't follow processes. We just don't do.
It's not human nature, is it?
No, because we're complex. We know more about the universe than we know what's going on between the 5 inches between our ears.
Yeah, that's possibly true.
It is true. We do know a hell of a lot more about the universe. Because we really don't know. I have no idea what you're thinking right now. And you have no idea what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? And we don't. And even as a psychiatrist or a psychologist, we really don't know. We can have a more informed opinion and we can ask questions to get to a more informed answer. But actually, we really don't know. And so what that means is that when we join the dots up, we want to be able to try to deliver change in people, but actually we can use technology to support that. So what can I systemize? What are the things that are mundane? And essentially you're robotizing. Today we're robotizing the brain. In the past we've robotized the body. So we use robots to pick things up, to move them around and put them down. Now we're using technology to say, where should I put it down? What should I pick up? And so technology can enable that change activity. So in all the things you described, it's really about putting people and data.
You're kind of alluding into today's tools, and we're talking about artificial intelligence. And we were talking earlier about when I was changing the insurance on on one of my cars, and initially the prompting all sounded very, very good, but it hadn't quite thought about the fact that I already had another car, and therefore the system couldn't quite cope with it. And that to me is someone who hasn't done their research to make sure that question was going to come up. So to me, planning, and that you made the comment about process, seems to be absolutely key to having a good, efficient business transformation.
Absolutely. You know, the Mark 1 human is highly unproductive sometimes, unreliable.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing the Mark 1 human being brings is agility.
Mm-hmm.
And the business I'm working with today, at the moment, you know, our systems failed, or somebody else's systems failed, but it meant we had no real data to operate.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But they adapted.
Right.
They went to paper, and all the product got out the door.
Right.
And
Right.
because they're able to do that, but the computer said no.
Right.
But the Mark 1 human said, no, I'm not accepting no.
Right.
And so that's the real advantage of having technology, and it's the marriage of technology and people that I think creates the real opportunity. But marrying them together, the challenge with tech is you can't really account for every scenario, because you'd spend too long thinking about developing it. So whether it's big change software, whether it's Microsoft products, you know, I just love Teams. If you got 5 minutes to spare whilst it loads up, you know, it's great. But you know, it's highly intelligent. It just doesn't really work as well with non-Microsoft systems. But you know, any technology will work, but there are always problems in processes. All processes work, but as soon as you fall out of a process, you're in this space where you don't really exist, and everyone experiences that. You know, I had friends who went on holiday and they've got twins, and they went onto an app and they applied for 2 visas last minute. But because they're both born on the same date with the same initials, the computer thought it was a duplication and kicked one out. Now they're not. But someone who's configured the system didn't think about, what if the twins have the same initials?
Right.
And so we all experience these things. It's when it becomes systematic and you repeat it, it becomes a real problem.
Right.
And as you said, when you told me the story, the Mark 1 human fixed it the following day.
Yeah, that bit was the easy bit.
Because
the system, they started off using a system which clearly had crumbled at the third hurdle. What would you, looking back at the projects you've done over the years, which is the project where you've seen the greatest change? And you make comments about behavior and process and then compute, but where you've had to change your mindset of an organization, which of those projects you've worked on over the years has given the greatest satisfaction, would you say?
Well, probably 2, actually, to be fair. Okay. The Garrick change, when we use Big Change.
Right.
And the Yodel
change. Let's hear more about that then.
So a traditional business based on paper.
Right.
Customers would order. Now, to be fair, it did have, you know, it had a Sage accounting system and it had an ERP system for recording hire contracts. But once you'd taken a few pieces of basic data, such as who the customer was, the product, where they wanted it delivered, put a price in, that created a contract. But nothing moved. You know, you can input the data, the customer can make the call, it can send an email, but nothing moved until someone pressed the button and it printed a piece of paper. And when that piece of paper was printed, it was printed in quadruplet. So one piece went in one file, another piece went somewhere else. And those pieces of paper were essentially work instructions. And those work instructions were given to people, and some people followed them and some people didn't. Some people partially followed them. Some pieces of paper got lost. Assets got lost. You know, if you take Garrick, they have a product called a wheel wash, and it's almost the size of a tennis court. I mean, how do you lose one of those? But if you lose the piece of paper that tells you where it is, then you don't know where it is anymore. And so it was a highly successful business. It had grown through the window of the sort of 150, the Dunbar number. It was now in a point where people's relationships couldn't hold the business together anymore.
You mean in their mind, they couldn't keep it there?
Yeah, and just as you didn't know everybody.
Mm.
It operated out of a number of depots as well, and it just made mistakes.
Mm.
You know, people make mistakes every day, and computers don't. And computers can make mistakes, but they're programmed to make mistakes. If you take the post office, for example, they knew it was making mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't that the computer decided to.
Yeah.
Which is one of the concerns around AI.
Yeah.
Is that if the computers have their own mind, then how do we
Yeah.
know they're doing the right thing? And so when Mark, who I've known for, as we said earlier on, 35 years, when Mark went there, and I've worked with Mark in other businesses, and we've had a business together. When he went there, he knew what he wanted to do, but he'd arrived in a position where he was the director.
Mm-hmm.
He needed someone to do the doing and the deciding. And he realised when he arrived in the business that perhaps it didn't quite have the resources needed. So that's when I got involved. And we started where we always start. You start with the process map, because until you can see what's happening, how do you know what's happening? And then we engage the staff.
Mm-hmm. Right.
In terms of, I might have been in the business for a couple of weeks, and some of the things they tell you, you think, that doesn't sound sensible. But you don't know the reasons why they do certain things. So I've got a Lean Six Sigma background. I do believe in the people that do the work are the ones who are best to fix the work. And so we got the staff to do the same. So we got the staff together and we said, we all would like to work in a better business in the terms of more successful. Mm-hmm. We'd like to make our lives easier. There's nothing wrong with that. So what would you do to make this business better and make your lives easier?
Right.
And we used mood boards and we used imagery to create the vision. Activities that we could do, changes we could make that would make either a, simple fix, more complex fix, relatively simple, low-level impact, and quite complex, high-level impact. And so there were some things we did that were quite simple, and there were other things that we decided to do, or the business decided it wanted to do, where it knew it was complex, but it had significant benefits. Mm-hmm. And one of those was to digitize the hire process.
The actual process of getting a vehicle or an appliance or whatever. So
we had the telephones, which essentially were digital. We had the ERP system. Mm-hmm. It didn't have a web ordering capability, primarily because when the customer called, the first thing they had to do was to call the depot to see if they had an asset, because the stock wasn't in the system.
Right.
So they would call the depot and say, have you got one of these? Mm-hmm. And the depot would say, yes, I've got one. And they'd say, that's absolutely great. Could you deliver it next Tuesday? And they said, yeah, we've got a window to deliver that next Tuesday. They go then back to the customer on the same call and say, great, this is the price. Yes, we've got one. Mm-hmm. And we can deliver it next Tuesday. Most of the time that customer would say, great, I'll come back to you. And they'd phone some other people for the price. Because that's what people do.
Oh, I see this.
Now, there are contracts and there are spot buying. But again, generally people want to know if you've got availability because they're planning. In construction and types of industries Garrick's in, things change.
Right.
So the customer then phones back and decides that they want to place the order. But we don't know if that asset's still there now because other people have phoned. So then that person had to phone the depot again and say, have you still got it? And in the hire game, you're hiring out assets and products that you don't have. Because if you've got it sat in the yard waiting to go, you're not making money. Mm-hmm. So you're really flying in the negative all the time. You're hiring out assets that you're hoping are coming back.
Like the airline booking.
Absolutely, yeah.
Same kind of thing.
It's bums on seats.
Or hotels come to that.
Every day an asset's in the yard, we lose money.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things when I went there, it was all about delivering product. Mm-hmm. It wasn't about collecting product. But if you don't collect it and get it back, you can't put it on hire.
You can't resell. No.
And so the whole industry really should be about collecting, not delivering. Because frankly, if it arrives a day late, it's a consequence that you've actually got your assets back quicker, so you've got more to hire out. Yeah. Because it's all about the hire rate. So they then call again and say, have you got it? And could you deliver it? And they say, yeah, we can. So then you go back to the customer and say, yeah, we've got it and we can deliver it. Brilliant. Right, we'll place the order. So then the pieces of paper would start to move. And stacks of paper, and they had trays and filing cabinets, and the driver would go out with a big pack of paper, and one sheet, it gets stuck to another sheet, and they get dropped and get wet and they get lost, and all of these things would happen. And, you know, the business coped and the customers accepted that some things happened and deliveries weren't made on time, or they went to the wrong place, or services were forgotten. You know, and it's put down to human error or paperwork, or numbers were incorrectly keyed in. But it put a burden on the business. And it's exponential. So, you know, if you operate with 10 people and you'll get, say, 2% error rate, and you start to operate with 20 people, it's still not 2%. It's probably 4%. You know, and then you start to 100 people and you're probably up to 6 or 7, 8%. Yeah. And so as you grow, you compound errors.
Yeah.
And that, again, when you grow with customers, it compounds into the customer. And then you struggle to get payment because invoices are incorrect. And then you have cash flow.
It's a ripple.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you look at successful people, and quite often they have an attention to detail. Because if you have that attention to detail, i.e. you get your processes to work efficiently and effectively, then you'll be successful.
I think it's a question of if it can go wrong, it will go wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
It just is that factor,
you know,
which goes
Mike
through
Tyson,
everything we do, isn't it?
Mike Tyson says everybody has a plan until someone punches you in the face. And that's true. I mean, you know, with change, with technology, there will always be a customer out there that will do something that you didn't expect, and your systems will fall over.
Yeah.
And the reason I went to Home Delivery Network, Yodel, as we talked about, when Mark asked me to go there, was because they had a project that was running around customer experience. How do they get it right first time to deliver a parcel to a customer?
Right.
And the project manager was constantly trying to fix problems that happened infrequently. So the one key question I asked every time someone came along with a problem or a change for a process was, how many parcels does that happen to every year?
Right.
And if the answer wasn't, you know, 5 figures, it was like, we'll deal with it.
He wasn't bothered.
No, just carry on. We're not going to make a change
for that.
It's
a
number.
Marginal.
It's a small number.
Right.
You know, it's 1 or 2 a week across the network. It's probably 4 figures as opposed to 5, but it's negligible. But if it was like 20% of the parcels, everything's going to grind to a halt.
Sure.
And we went live, or so we were in testing, and we identified some problems that literally, in fact, we went live, and we hadn't thought through far enough some scenarios where people receive parcels on a frequent basis, and then are on holiday for a period, and all of a sudden parcels were coming into the depot, and the rules we built into the system, they would arrive into the depot and would immediately get sent back because the computer said, oh no, these need to go back. We've tried too many times to deliver this parcel.
No good.
And it wasn't that one, it was the other parcels we'd been trying to deliver. And so again, we fixed it.
Yeah.
You know, it happened once, a customer phoned up. And that's what happens with technology. Is it's not adaptable like a human.
So why don't we just, taking a lot of the background expertise and knowledge you've had from the various projects, and kind of cast our minds forward now, and that is looking at what you can see the big benefits are of, say, big data. The fact that, say, big change, we are a data company. So we are watching, and all our vehicles which are out there, our clients' vehicles, they're all being watched. We're seeing every transaction which goes through. So we are a data company. And I'm just keen to understand from your perspective as a consultant, the value of what that big data means to a company in terms of assessing their performance and their market share, etc. What are your thoughts in that area?
It's interesting we talk about big data as being new, but it's not.
Right.
So in 2000, I had an internship with American Express. Everybody sees American Express as a credit card company. And it makes quite a bit of money out of credit cards. But it's a data business. American Express knows how many people are going on a plane in America on any given day. You know which airports, you know what hotels they're going to stay in, because they've got all the data. So they buy ahead the airplane tickets. They buy ahead the hotel rooms. And then they offer those back to the card holders at a discounted rate. but they already win because they already know who's not necessarily the individual who's going, although with some, you'll take Tesco. You know, Terry Leahy became who he is on the back of data, understanding the value of big data. The real challenge is actually creating big data and then creating little data. Because for everybody to do the jobs you described there, for me to dig a hole in the ground in the right place, I don't need a lot of information. I just need to know where it is and what I'm supposed to do. And perhaps if I come across a problem, how do I resolve it quickly? So it's about them being able to link data together. And that's the real value of the big data piece, is how do you link it together? And how do you make it available at the right time to the right people? And then it's turning big data into insight,
usable
actionable insight.
Data, right?
It's the so what.
Gotcha.
You know, people throughout my career would come and tell me things, would show me numbers, and you know, and my answer is always the same. It's so what. You know, this is bigger than that. That's smaller than that.
Could you give us examples of where you have successfully run big data projects and the outcomes you've received from them? Do you have an example of that? I mean, you mentioned Yodel earlier on, for example.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we did at Yodel is we outsourced the contact centers, and the call abandonment rates were supposed to. The call rates were supposed to reduce, and actually they got the data wrong at the beginning. They counted it wrong,
right?
And they wanted to shut the contact center, and we had to prove to them through the data that actually no, you need to keep them open, and these are the reasons why. And it was we need, you know, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it.
Right.
When we were at Lloyd's Banking Group, what we identified there was that we had to listen to 3,000 calls because we didn't have any data. So we had to create some. So we created a team, a test and learn team. They listened to 3,000 calls. We measured the components of the insurance sales process. We changed the insurance sales process to take significant cost out of the process. But what it also showed us was that 25% of the internet business wasn't coming from the internet. It was coming from the contact center. The internet business wasn't profitable.
Right.
Taking 25% of the volume out made it a real problem.
Right.
And when I was asked by the director, the sales director, do my people not know this? And I said, well, they know these things happen. They just don't know to what extent. But I know because I've got the data. I can prove it.
Right.
And it all boils back to human behavior. Because internet discounts are higher than generally telephone call discounts when you're in the insurance game. But the people in the contact center would capture what's called the communication code, which linked to a discount in the system. Now, we didn't tell them what the internet codes were, but they got to find out. You only had to go onto the website to see them yourself. So they got to understand that actually they could use an internet code, even though the customer might give them a newspaper code or a magazine code or something else. So they would actually then go and put the code in that they wanted to put in. But they also knew that people were tracking it. So they would use different ones on different occasions. What was really concerning was that downstairs there was a marketing team who we also worked with that spent £40 million a year using the communication codes that were input by the sales team. So they were making decisions on the basis that the customer was phoning up with the code and the customers weren't. And it was all data, but it was understanding. It was the so what and what created the data, what caused it to be the way it was.
Trying to get that thread there, what you're saying is without the big data, you wouldn't have, without having that empirical view of the business operation, you wouldn't have realized this disconnect between the customer care center and the actual internet transactions. Is that
absolutely
the point you're making?
Yeah. And the same with if you look at Garrick, we didn't really know how long it took us to collect unless we went into the data.
Right.
But you had to go and find it.
Right.
So the real challenge is how do I work with a charity and I work with a business at the moment. There's no dashboard.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing tells me in any given day what's going on.
Right.
You know, you go into some businesses and their big piece of data is their share price.
Okay.
You know, and it'll flash across the front or they'll have it
Yeah.
open.
Yeah.
But they'll also put things like the temperature today. It's sort of
Yeah.
interesting to know, but so what?
Yeah.
It's 21 degrees outside.
Mm.
Other organisations, you go along and they'll tell you when the last time there was an accident.
Right.
So
Right.
I generally ask people, what are the three key numbers? What are the 3 key numbers you need to know to run the business?
Right.
And that's not always necessarily the same 3 for the same manager or director or same operative.
Mm-hmm.
What are the 3 things that you need to
Mm-hmm.
look at? So what big data gives you is the opportunity to give all of those people their 3 numbers.
Right.
In the past, it was, these are our 3 numbers. You know, we'll tell you what the temperature of the outside is, and we'll tell you what our share price is, and, you know, we might tell you how many accidents we've had, because we can do this, because we capture it,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't necessarily capture and report the right things.
Gotcha.
And so, you know, the charity I work with, we report things like the number of visitors to our Facebook page and some of the money that we make on our fundraising activity. Now, the money we make on our fundraising activity is great, but some of the things we want to know is really, what's the cost of delivering an hour's worth of care to the people that we go and see? How many hours of care have we delivered this week? How many hours of care should we have delivered? What was the cost of delivering that care? Because, you know, we don't have an endless pot of money, and we need to be more efficient and more effective in delivering that cost of care. So actually the cost of care is a really key number, but we don't really report it.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't quite got the big data, and we're a small charity.
Right.
And that's what big data brings to organizations is, where are our people? What are they doing? What information do they need? What information might they need? And how do we enable them to access that simply,
Okay.
so that they can continue to do what they do rather than stop?
Yeah.
And what you tend to find is that it's the stopping and the starting, or the computer says no, which causes frustration.
Right. What was it about Big Change in terms of its field management software that you felt was the right fit for the firm that you were advising at that time?
I think the key things were the simplicity in terms of the user interface for things like scheduling.
Okay. Yeah.
Was really important.
Right.
The ability to send simple jobs and also complex jobs to field agents, engineers, drivers, and to be able to configure those, because and the complexity, we could simplify the complexity of the business into the technology.
Right.
That wasn't simple to do.
Right.
But what we were then able to do is make what is complex simple for the people that were doing the jobs they did.
The actual
so
teams.
You know, we had, for example, a piece of paper with, let's say, 200 fields on it, because those 200 fields were there so that we could do a pre-delivery inspection on any asset. So it had to cover everything. But when I digitize it, I don't want to ask those 200 questions. For this asset, I want to ask this 6. And for this asset, I want to ask these 10. And actually, for this particular asset, I now want to add some questions, which means I don't now need to go and reprint the paperwork. Right. I can target certain individuals. And there's lots of things I can do. I can push one-point lessons to individual engineers. I can make announcements. We can get them to their locations more efficiently. But probably everybody loves SatNav when they're going somewhere, but not when they're going somewhere and they're a delivery driver. You know, delivery drivers don't like SatNav because it gets them somewhere efficiently. And sometimes they don't want to get there.
They might want to go to the cafe on the way.
Yeah, or they like to go a particular route because they like that way.
Yeah.
And actually one of the real challenges in delivering technology into people's hands is that when the technology tells them what they need to do, not everybody likes it.
Yeah.
And it
There's a
does
human,
make.
sorry, there's a human side to all this, and
And
bringing
this
the
is the
team with you.
this is
Yeah.
back to the people, process,
Yeah.
profit.
Yeah,
You can have a process, you can have technology, and if you can completely remove Mark One human,
yeah.
fine. But what you're really doing is commoditizing the process. So the only value is really in
So
moving the data.
let me pick up on that last point about people, process, profit. So what kind of performance change did you see as a consequence of digitizing your business processes with Big Change?
We became a much more efficient business. And actually, a lot of it's visual and behavioral. So it's a little bit like the Hawthorne effect in that when you start to measure one thing, everybody improves their performance. Everybody realizes that
The eyes are on them.
Or actually, the eyes are on somebody else, but they might be on me next.
You never know.
So before it gets to me, I'm going to get better.
And the business grew?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Right.
the business was able to grow. The challenge was as you have more deliveries, you have more assets. Now, again, if the business wanted to move towards an asset-based lending model.
Right.
Well, you can't really go to the bank and say, lend me some money, but we don't really know where our assets are. They want to know where they are. They want data. And so moving to different finance models requires you to have data. And so when I say visual, I said to the people there, and I took photographs, these filing cabinets, these trays, this paper's going. You're not going to need printers because you're not going to print anything out. And that's what happened. If you go there today, there are no filing cabinets, there are no trays.
All right.
People,
the office is half the size.
Absolutely. I mean, the space. There's space in people's minds to grow.
Yeah.
People can start to work on the business, not in the business.
Yeah.
They're not constantly trying to fix things, find things. If you want to know who delivered what last Tuesday, you press a button.
Yeah.
It's there in 10 seconds.
It's there.
Yeah. And now it is that balance between human behavior and technology. And getting people to behave with technology, both in terms of the customer and the employee, is not always easy. I'll give you a quick example. When I was at AXA, we changed the bond valuation process. They introduced some new technology. The old technology was slow. It used to take maybe 20 or 30 seconds to come up with the value. And the sales agents were trained to fill the void because you didn't want to sit there in silence. So they would have phrases like, yeah, the mice are running around the wheel. Yeah, it'll be with us in a minute. Yeah. And people would call quite regularly to have these prices played back to them because they wanted to make a decision on, investing further or taking their money out, etc. So people were very familiar with the mice going around the wheel. So when we introduced new technology, and also it was probably 80% of the process in time in that department was this part. So the new technology reduced it from 30 seconds to instantaneous. So when the customers phoned up, we were like, we're going to have a massive saving in time here. It's going to be like, we can scale this department now. We can put another 40% to 100% volume of business through this department. We don't need to employ any more people as soon as we implement the technology.
Gotcha.
Implemented the technology and the call handling time went up. And we were like, that doesn't make sense.
What's happened here?
Out. Because the customer didn't believe that we'd given them the right price.
Right.
Because it was instant. So they said, can I have a valuation of my bond? And they said, yeah, it's £257,615.
Yes.
And the customer went, no, that must be yesterday's.
Yeah.
No, it's not yesterday's, that's today's. No.
You did it too quickly.
Yeah.
You're too efficient.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what we had to do is to build a delay in.
Lovely. I love that thought. Yes.
So we didn't want to explain to the customer constantly what was going on.
Yeah.
So we built the delay in, and then over time,
Yeah.
we reduced the time so that people started to get used to it being a bit quicker. We didn't have to explain it to them. And so over a period of time, we got it down to 0 and people got used to being given it quickly. And it's that human behavior bit, how you bring together technology and people and manage the interface is where the success comes from. So if you can understand the people and you can understand the technology and the data they need at the time to be able to fulfill the role they need to do, and only the data they really need, and you don't swamp them. You can get that bit right, and you can get them confident. And that's what I loved about Big Change when we brought it in. It was simple. It was complex in the background. The stuff we had to do to configure it was complicated. But with the process mapping work that we've done, and there's a process to follow, if you know what you do, you can digitize it. If you don't know what you do, you can't digitize it. And I would say the vast majority of companies don't know what they do. They think they do, but they don't.
So Lee, let's think about what you've been saying here in terms of change. And you've done it obviously many times, because we've gone through half a dozen different instances, from the very largest to your current project, which is, as you, in your own words, a relatively small project based in the Lake District. It sounds a fascinating one. But what are the 5 key or 6 key drivers which enable you to focus on inducing that organization to change? What are the key moments that you can see the problem, but they haven't quite got to the problem? And once they've got that sort of eureka moment, what are those key points that assist you in driving that transformation project through to success?
I think it's important that you do communicate regularly.
Okay.
The reasons why you're doing it, but also what's in it for them, how it's going to impact people. We don't like surprises. I think in terms of people, you need your subject matter experts. But the challenge is often that it's turkeys voting for Christmas, because quite often technology simplifies things. And so I'm a subject matter expert. I put the time and effort in. I've done my 10,000 hours to be this person now. But now you're going to introduce something that means I've got to start again. Everybody else can, and perhaps I haven't got the energy. And you've got people who think like that. And they'll resist change, even though they're the subject matter experts. And then you've got people who just generally resist change. The people that perhaps what we would call strategically unsavvy, they just want to do what they do. They don't really want to change. And moving those people, especially the ones that are vocal, the people that aren't the quiet ones that sit there, but the loud ones that tell everybody else. They're the people that actually have some technical knowledge, but they're just not bought in emotionally. They like to go around terrorizing people. You need to identify them. And so I identified the terrorists early on. Because they can become champions if you get them on board emotionally. So in dealing with the people, that's invariably what we try to do, is identify the subject matter experts, because they know how things work, but also understand their position. Are they going to come on board, or are they going to move from being that champion to a terrorist, and vice versa? And you've got to move them along at some point in the future. But they're generally a bit like sheep. Once you get enough people moving, and once people start to communicate back that the new world is okay, people generally move. But I think the other aspect really is, and it never astonishes me whenever I go into a business. I never see this. I talk about mindsets. Have we got a customer mindset? Have we got a people mindset? Have we got a process mindset? And have you got a value mindset? And I generally talk about change as well. But if you've got a process mindset, then you have process maps on the wall. If you have a people mindset, then the photographs of your people on the wall. You use your people in your advertisements and your marketing because they're your people. They're not actors. You don't employ actors, you employ people. So the process bit for me is really important, because if you can see it and people can talk about it, then you can change it. But if it's invisible, and that's the problem with data, is data's invisible. We can create lots of waste in terms of data, and it just sits inside your computer. If we were a production company and we created lots of waste, it would sit at the back. If you travel on a train, you tend to see it all the mistakes, all the errors, all the stuff that's going to waste. But with data, we don't. And so especially if you're a data-driven organization, and I've witnessed businesses capture data and then just delete it.
Do nothing with it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Or miss the opportunity to capture data. At Lloyd's, we had insurance, home insurance, car insurance, decided to introduce pet insurance. Took them a year to introduce it. They didn't ask the question for 12 months, do you have any pets? No, didn't bother to ask that question. Then they introduced pet insurance and decided to try and sell pet insurance to 26 million households.
And bingo.
Tesco, on the other hand, said, who buys pet products? Let's sell them pet insurance and let's not bother trying to sell it to anybody else. So there's an intelligence there that's required in thinking about what do we need when we're about to execute, and having that sort of foresight to think into the future to say, let's sort of start doing it now. So you've got to think forward. You've got to scenario analyze. You can't scenario analyze everything. You've got to understand that you're going to fail. Try and break it. Don't try and build something that's utterly perfect. You're not building a house of cards. You've got to constantly try and break it as you're going, and understand that you perhaps might. When I say break people, I don't mean in a sort of very detrimental way, but some people will just get off the bus.
And find your champions.
Absolutely.
Champions seem to rule the world, don't they?
They do, because they're the people that functionally and emotionally buy in. They technically know it, and emotionally they want it. And if you can create those champions and you can communicate and you can share processes with people, and I think I finished the last section on if you don't really know what's happening in your business, you can't change it. And most organizations don't really know what goes on.
Interesting remark. So do we know our business? Do we really know what happens? We sell lovely stuff, but do we really know what happens on the inside to get that lovely stuff out the door?
Absolutely, and how it's connected.
Night? Yeah, so understand your business, understand your people, and then think about how we're going to change and find your champions.
It all boils down to 4 elements. It's inputs, processes, outputs, and outcomes. You can describe any activity in the human body, be it in the neurons, be it in your liver, by those 4 elements. And you can describe every element in a business in terms of the inputs. This podcast has a series of inputs: cameras, microphones, technical capability, speakers, questions. There's a process we've gone through, and there's an output, which will be a recording, a sound recording, a video recording, but it'll be an experience for me and you. You'll probably think, geez, I'm not listening to him speak again. And then there'll be an outcome, which will be the production of the podcast, which actually, again, will be a process in itself.
And for sure.
As you define the inputs and the process and the outputs, if you can change those things, the inputs, the process, and the outputs, you'll get a different outcome. You'll get the change you want.
If you look at the way the world has changed in terms of location-based tracking, we now have home deliveries, we have Uber, how the world has changed in the last 15 years. Some people have profited by that. Other people have gone by the wayside. The London taxi is grumpy and moaning. Uber themselves are happy as Larry. So I think the earlier point is you can resist change, but you resist it at your peril.
Absolutely. I just listened to the chief exec of Netflix talk about how they offered themselves to Blockbuster for 50 million. And Blockbuster said no.
No thanks.
We're going to do it better than you. And clearly they didn't.
Where are they now? Lee, I think you've brought the conversation to a very fitting finale there. You've spoken about people and process and technology. And I think what we picked up from that, apart from having the right solution, is having the right people to do the job with a clear process. So I think if anything we picked up from your conversation and your insights today, it is all about the process and all about managing the people. The technology will come along in the stream of it all.
Absolutely.
So on behalf of Big Change, thank you very much indeed. And long will our relationship continue.
No problem.
Thank you again. Thank you.